everyone, and welcome to the Led Zeppelin Song Remains the Same, the movie review as promised. I've been looking forward to doing this one. It was the first time I ever saw Led Zeppelin, was in my friend's house, and I remember they put on Song Remains the Same. The first thing I saw was Jimmy Page coming out with his Les Paul, and he held it really low down like that. And they didn't have a rhythm guitarist, and at that time when I was learning guitar I didn't understand, why doesn't he have a rhythm guitarist? But with those three musicians you don't need anyone else to make a full band. So Song Remains the Same was recorded in 1973 in Madison Square Garden, New York. And it wasn't released until 1976, until Led Zeppelin came up with their own record label called Swan Songs. This isn't the same tour shirt, but that's the Swan Song symbol with the Icarus on. And Peter Grant said, and I quote, "the most expensive movie ever made." So I'm not sure if he was over exaggerating, or you can imagine how much money Zeppelin made. I'm not sure if it was some sort of English quip, but that's what Peter Grant said. Now, with this movie, it's slightly different to the CD. Today we're doing a review on the movie, or as we call it now, the DVD. And the opening scene, when you first turn that on, it has the mob rub out, which is kind of weird. You don't know what's going to happen. It's just like these gangsters. And then, spoiler alert, I am going to say some things about the DVD. So if you haven't seen it before, I highly recommend it. Go watch it now and come back. 'Cause, spoiler alert, I am going to share a few little nuggets out of this. They did a mob rub out, and Peter Grant and Richard Cole were actually dressed up as gangsters, and they did what's called a mob rub out. And it's just, I'll tell you what, it is some parts of this movie, to be honest, cool movie. It was made in the 70s, but some of it is a little disturbing to some people. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. But there's one part where they're playing some game, the gangsters, and there's a werewolf there. One of the gangsters is literally a werewolf, and then the other guy, when his head falls off, he's got like rainbow coloured stuff comes out. It's trippy, but I like it. And then the next part you see in the movie is the band at home. So you see Jonesy, John Paul Jones, wearing a big blonde wig. If anyone's ever wondered that, you see John Paul Jones at home with his family, you think, why is this guy, one of the richest people around, have a haircut like that, and he's married with kids? The answer is, I'll tell you later. And you see Robert Plant as well in his country home on this awesome property. I remember Robert Plant said that when he read Tolkien, he just had to go and live in the country after that. And then Pagey as well. You see Jimmy Page. In this movie you don't see much of Jimmy Page's private life. All you see is the autumn lake, and then Jimmy Page is playing what's called a hurdy-gurdy, and then he turns around and you see these red eyes, and then he disappears into a bubbling pot of stew. It's the only way I can say it. And then you see John Paul Jones with his family, and he reads the letter, and he said tour dates, and then he reads them and goes, this is tomorrow, 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 and you see them fly out onto the Starship. They had their own aeroplane, which is called the Starship. It wasn't their own, they rented it. They used to have a smaller private jet, I believe, but it had too much turbulence. Surely you think Zeppelin could buy their own plane, but they hired it. I think it was $20,000 a year they rented it for. In those days that's like probably $1 million now a year or something. And that was the Starship. There's a whole book on, stories, or probably books about the stories that went on in the Starship. They had all sorts of things you could do on there. And then you see the band get a limousine they get off the Starship, and they get on a limousine, and they go to the concert where they have police escort, and you can see it clicks to the crowd waiting, and you see them in the limousine and the crowd's waiting. And finally the concert erupts, and the concert erupts into rock and roll. The guys come out and play rock and roll, and to me it's one of the best opening numbers for a band, especially them, Led Zeppelin. They recorded this at the end of the tour. Believe it or not, this is just, they wanted to record, and have something to show what they've done on tour, but this unfortunately was towards the end of the tour. So the band comes out and they're rocking the song Rock and Roll, and it was like, you know, watching four animals released out of a cage when they come out and see the crowd. It's just something to behold. And then excuse me, you see Robert Plant's, then you hear Robert Plant's voice, and I remember as a young musician, I was about 16, 17 when I first saw it, and I remember hearing Rock and Roll in the studio and Robert Plant is singing, you know, super high falsetto, but then he comes out and starts singing, and by that time Robert's voice, I've said in previous videos, Robert's voice was starting to deteriorate, and especially at the end of the tour. And the problem with this concert though is that only parts of it were actually recorded on video. The audio, as far as I know, was recorded. You can find different recordings out there. It was recorded over 3 different nights at Madison Square Garden, the same location. And I remember John Paul Jones, he didn't want to wear the same clothes all 3 nights, so that was a bit of a editing nightmare to pull those all together. And then, but only parts of them were recorded, and there's a few different theories. One of them I heard was that they were only doing it as a little record of how they played, so they only recorded a part of a song and then they turn it off. Or another theory is that some of the guys in the 70s, the camera crew, were just so out of it, they just was like, wouldn't turn the camera on, or just, you know, fell asleep with the camera or whatever they did. So there was only parts of these 3 concerts that were recorded, and the rest had to be re-recorded in the UK. They made up a special set, and the band had to dress up again, and this is where it comes in. John Paul Jones had to wear a wig, because since then he had a haircut. So you notice in the opening scene, when John Paul Jones with his family has like a blonde bob wig, and then when Jones is playing the organ in No Quarter, you'll see he's got that big blonde bob wig. So that's why they had to re-record some parts. And also, spoiler alert, some of the parts you'll see a little bit out of sync. You see Page's fingers don't line up with the playing, and I used to try and emulate Page's playing in these songs, and I still do it. I actually play them somehow out of sync to the song that's in time, because that's how Pagey did it. And they had to re-record parts, but they got it all together, and I think, you know, it's a pretty good concert. People say, you know, it wasn't them at their best. Who knows when Zeppelin were at their best, but I think this is them, you know, rising towards the peak of their performance live. And it's great how they stretched out songs like Dazed and Confused, the 30-minute showcase, and I'd love to add some parts in this, but go watch it for yourself. And I just highly recommend, you know, the concert footage. And there's also an audio DVD while we're touching on that. I didn't show you the album cover. That's the DVD cover. The song remains the same as Pagey's Les Paul. And then there's also the audio recording, which we're not reviewing today. The audio recording actually has some different songs that weren't on the video, like, for instance, Celebration Day. That live version of Celebration Day is ridiculously good. Over the Hills and Far Away, another great version. Robert's vocals were great too. Misty Mountain Hop was another song that wasn't included on the movie, and The Ocean was another song. So there's 4 extra songs that you get on the CD soundtrack to the movie. Okay, now I'll bring this to a close. Now I could go on forever. I'm trying to keep these reviews down to about 10 minutes. If you're wondering why I keep looking down, it's because my dog's here literally staring at me, so apologies for that. I'm trying to stare into a camera, talk to y'all, and not talk to my dog. Hello. Now, another part of the movie is the fantasy scenes, where we see a glimpse into the band's dreams and pastimes. So for Pagey, basically all we see is him climbing a mountain, and he turns into the hermit, and he has that sort of laser sword thing. You don't really see much of Pagey's home life. He was very mysterious, that's how Pagey was. He had a strict private life, an awesome life, Pagey. He's 80 years old now. Then we see also the fantasy scenes where John Paul Jones is riding around on a horse, and I'm not sure exactly what he was doing. He was wearing a mask, riding around at night with a top hat on and a cape, and I'm not sure what he did, but somehow he was riding around scaring people, and then when he got home it was actually his wife who he was scaring, so I'm not sure these bits are all, this movie is trippy. That's all I can say. It's a trip. It's a whole trip. You have to watch the whole thing to see. And also Robert Plant, you see when they do Song Remains the Same and the Rain Song, you see Robert Plant, he's like Viking. That was one of the things that Robert Plant loved, was Tolkien and Viking and Nordic mythology and things like that. And Robert Plant, you see in the scene where he eats a mushroom, he looks up during the Rain Song, and he goes on a ship and he goes to a castle and wins the Fair Maiden, and it's really a cool scene where you see some of those things. Then finally, another thing, they have all these little extras as well, and one I wanted to touch on was Peter Grant verbally abusing one of the concessionaires. Now, going back to when I was 16, when I watched this video, I memorised the whole thing. I could word for word say what Peter Grant says on there, but I don't want it to get past YouTube. But just trust me, I'll say a little bit of it. Peter Grant, you can imagine how big he was, and some people, the concessionaire people, were selling photos that weren't authorised by the band, and he'd come up and he'd say, "Don't talk to me, it's my bloody act. I do better leave you anytime. You couldn't give him a starting line. I bet this wouldn't happen in Europe." And so I could do the whole thing, but there's too much swearing to get through YouTube, obviously. But yeah, you get some little glimpses like that when the band was robbed of all that money. They played that during the Heartbreaker song, and you see other little bits like John Bonham. The amount of hobbies John Bonham had. He played snooker, drove racing cars, taught his son how to play drums, Jason Bonham. What else did Bonzo do? He just drove motorbikes, and he had it like a farm. You see him with a cow. So Bonzo had a lot of hobbies. He used to be a carpenter apprentice for his dad before he became a drummer. And finally, what I'd like to just say about this in finishing up is it's a great concert. Like, some people see it as a movie and they say that's not them at their best, but it's a great concert if you couldn't attend. Like these guys had sellout shows. You couldn't buy anything online in those days. You had to line up, and if the tickets were gone, they were gone. And so this was one way for people a few years later to actually see Led Zeppelin and how they stretched out the song and expanded them live, and even a glimpse into their pastimes and into even backstage. You see some bits, little backstage bits where Paige is drinking some orange juice and things, that in little bits where you see them come off at the end and go in the limo back to the airport, or the hotel. So I hope you enjoyed this today. Thank you for watching Boogie Mama Riffs and Reviews. This is Led Zeppelin's Song Remains the Same. Movie, I highly recommend it. Peace out.